All right, there is a ton I have to talk to you guys about this week. As you probably know, I was in Israel last week where I was invited to speak at a video conference. The remainder of the week was spent wandering the streets, talking to people about peace, and eating ridiculous amounts of hummus. Spending most of my time in Tel Aviv, I saw people of pretty much every race, color, religion, ethnicity, and nationality living side by side. I heard Hebrew, Arabic, English, French, Spanish, Japanese, German, and several other languages being spoken simultaneously in restaurants, in cafes. I saw coexistence in a part of the world that has very little of it. I also spent a day in Jerusalem. If you saw the video that we posted a couple days ago, I tried to show how close these religious sites are and give a little context to an extremely small yet complex city. Walking through the old city of Jerusalem, I explored the Jewish and Christian quarters and stopped for falafel in the Arab quarter. I felt it was important not just to talk about these places as we do, but actually to live them as well. I exited the old city at the Damascus Gate, where literally a day before a Jew had been stabbed. While there was no doubt the neighborhood was tense, there was also a feeling that this was life, and life goes on. Unfortunately, I heard about the San Bernardino terrorist attacks while on the beach in Israel. I can't really explain to you guys how incredibly surreal it was to be so far away from something so horrific happening 60 miles away from where I live, while I was 7,600 miles away from home. Adding to the surreal feeling was that I was in the epicenter of a country that deals with terrorism in some form or another pretty much every day. Suddenly, I had people asking me what it was like to be in America with all our mass shootings. The world felt completely flipped on its head. On the 14-hour plane ride back to Los Angeles, I read What's Left by my guest this week, Nick Cohen. Nick is a writer for Time, Spectator, The Observer, and Standpoint. His first book, What's Left, is an absolute must-read if you dig what we do here. Though What's Left was written in 2007, Nick absolutely nails so much of the lunacy we've been talking about on the left these days, from their dishonest tactics of lying about opponents' views to aligning themselves with people who would just as easily have them killed. He goes on a journey through history to show how the far left has so often strengthened the very ideas that they purport to be against. There were so many passages of the book that I felt like could have been written today that it was almost like reading something from the future. He nailed the regressive left before the term was even out there. Speaking of the regressives, you didn't think I was going to get through a show without mentioning them, did you? Yeah, not going to happen. One of the issues I've called them out on consistently is that if they don't stop smearing the liberals willing to talk about Islamic extremism, that they're going to hand our future to the far right. We're seeing this right this very second across Europe as far-right parties are winning elections and gaining in the polls, from France to Belgium to Sweden and more. This is clearly coming to the American shores right now, too, as Donald Trump just this week called for denying Muslims entry into the United States. Obviously, this is idiotic, over the top, and ridiculous, but it can only exist in a climate where fear of real discussion has been stifled. If we aren't afraid of talking about Islamism, especially the difference between people and doctrine, then we can finally have an honest conversation about refugees, immigration, and everything else. But if we do as the regressives are doing this very second, by making no distinction between people who are trying to talk about serious issues versus people who trade on fear, then we help the real xenophobes and silence the reformers. Even as a kid, I always loved John F. Kennedy's famous quote, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." It's lofty and big, but it hits something that is extremely human. Sometimes fear in things is scarier than the actual thing itself. That's not to say that radical Islam isn't scary, but we also feed that fear if we don't deal with it honestly. Now, though, we live in a time when people are incredibly fearful, and much of it is with good reason, as we've seen the spread of an evil ideology with no signs of letting up. That doesn't mean we have to be afraid to speak out against it or silence those who dare to do so. Actually, of course, it means the exact opposite. Fear is what the regressives and the far right are both going to use to splinter us against each other so they can gain power. The world is in a strange, fearful moment right this very second. We can either give into our worst impulses or try to be better. I'm pretty sure you guys know which side I'm going to choose. As we sat in a packed restaurant in Tel Aviv, I asked a friend how he feels about all the stabbings. Without missing a beat, he said, "We have to keep living, we have no choice." I think we could all use a little of that spirit right now. Let's not give in to fear fed to us by terrorists or fear fed to us by politicians. Let's keep fighting, because if we don't, choice is exactly what we're going to give up. My guest this week is a writer for The Observer, The Spectator, Time, and Standpoint. He's authored 2 books, You Can't Read This Book and What's Left. I just read What's Left, and I'm thrilled to have him here. Nick Cohen, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here.
So Nick, I was telling you right before we started, I just read the book, so all of your thoughts in What's Left they're right at the tip of my brain right now, and I loved it. I have been so in this regressive left thing, this far left thing, that your whole book is about, and you saw it early, so I want to get to that. But before we start, give me some of your liberal credentials, because I want people to know that you're a lefty. Because we're going to talk shit about the left, so I want people to know you're an actual lefty.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm from, in Britain, in Europe, you wouldn't call me a liberal, you would call me a socialist. I'm from the socialist left, which, for whatever its problems, and they are manifest and manifold, and presumably covered at great length in America, used to believe in things like secularism, in anti-fascism, in feminism to an extent, in being a part of the Party of Progress. And it used to have some idea of what to do with the world. And I gradually realised, looking around me, that this was no longer the case. That if you want to put it in sort of really rather rubbish terms, really, that I didn't leave the left left me. That's not really true. But there was no longer a universal left-wing message, which meant that people around the world could say, look, we're oppressed, and we're oppressed by hideous reactionary forces. The left-wing will sort us.
So being in the UK, I've had a bunch of my guests have been lefties in the UK that are talking about the same issues that you're talking about. What is going on in the UK that I think woke you guys up to this before it was awoken in America? Because really here, it's only in the last year, I think, that liberals are waking up to what's going on our side.
Yeah, we've got a saying over here, Dave, that whatever happens in America happens in Britain and Europe 5 years later. I think for once it's the other way around. I think that really big arguments and big battles we've had in Britain in particular are now coming to America. You know, the causality has been reversed a bit. There's been the most ferocious rows here, which I'm pleased about, because I'm a polemicist, I'm a political animal. I don't believe that being PC and nice and kind and gentle is a way of sorting out problems. Is often a way of covering them up. But there have been huge rows in Britain, really since 9/11. In my case, since the Iraq War, which might seem rather odd, but your older viewers may remember, your frankly decrepit viewers may remember, that once Saddam Hussein was an enemy of the left, left-wingers used to campaign in favour of rights for the Kurds and call Saddam Hussein a fascist. So in my case, it wasn't 9/11, it was 2003 with the Iraq War, and I started thinking, well, what happened to all of that in my youth? Why are European leftists, for good reasons, hell, you never need a good reason to. There are plenty of good reasons to oppose George W. Bush. But why was it that there was simply no concern for Kurds in Iraq, for socialists in Iraq, for trade unions in Iraq, who had been until the late 80s? There'll be demos about them, there'll be petitions for their support. They'll come and stay at my parents' home, all that kind of thing. And you thought, what happened there? And once you start asking that question, it's a very simple question. Who are your friends? Who, to use old left-wing language, are your comrades? Who are you sticking up for? However critical you want to be of American policy or British policy, and I'll repeat it throughout this interview, there are always good grounds to be critical of American and British policy. Yeah, but who are you actually supporting? And then you get some rather ugly answers, and you find a sort of great vacuum on most of the left. There are many good left-wingers, but on most of the left where a principled ideology ought to be.
Yeah, so right there, you hit a lot of the book. So a lot of the book deals directly with Iraq and how it woke you up, as you just said, and the horrible things that Saddam was doing and the horrible things that the Ba'ath Party was up to. So before we get into that, because I was actually surprised how much of your journey was through Iraq, but before we get into that specifically, the phrase regressive left, so it was coined by Maajid Nawaz, and it's really taken off here. And at the beginning of the book, you mention that you didn't necessarily have a word for this, and you said you didn't want to get too hung up sort of on words. Do you like the phrase regressive left?
Yes, I wish I thought of it, Dave. but there's something else. Here's the thing. What's Left came out in 2007. My God, I lost jobs because of it. All hell broke loose when I published it. But the reason I didn't, I love the phrase regressive left, and it's absolutely right. The reason why I didn't put a name to it is this. You can say very easily, oh, this is just the far left. People who used to be Marxist, Leninists, Trotskyists, Stalinists, what have you. But here's the problem when you interrogate these attitudes. They go way, way, way into the mainstream. It's people who don't consider themselves left-wing at all. Typically in Britain, I'm sure this is true in America as well, from what I've seen. It's people in broadcasting. It's people in universities. It's people in schools. It's people in publishing. It's people who are, you had to define themselves as quite vaguely liberal, but then have a load of ideas, a load of baggage on them, terrible ideas which started on the far left. And this is what drove people wild in Britain when this book was published. Because I wasn't just talking about some people on the fringe. I was sort of talking about people, here in Britain we'll say BBC type people.
Right.
Who never consider themselves extreme, always consider themselves moderate and neutral. And I was saying, but look, these ideas that began on the far left, that it's okay to go along with regimes and movements that want to subjugate all the women, kill all the homosexuals, kill all the Jews, kill any Muslim who, of his or her own free will, decides to change their religion or decides there is no God, there is no Allah at all. You're going along with all of this. It wouldn't matter if it was just the extreme. What matters is that this is permeating the whole liberal spectrum, and that's what drove people wild about the book.
Yeah.
To me, that was so obviously true, and it seems to be true about America at the moment as well.
Yeah, so you hit on a lot there. So partly it seems to me that it's a little bit like the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Oh, yeah.
That these people, and I think you hit on this a bunch, that these people, they have good intentions in that they don't want extra war. And we have had a ridiculous, both of our countries, right? You in the UK and me in America.
We're all with you.
Right. We have had plenty of ridiculous, unnecessary wars. We've done all kinds of things, drone strikes, all of these things that we on the left are not thrilled with. But you make a really good argument for what is the alternative, that we basically just give up on all of these people that live under these horrible theocracies, and that's what put these people in the far left in bed with some really terrible people.
Yeah. It's also, Dave, if you were to get a time machine and go into the future, say 50 years into the future, there are bound to be all kinds of ideas that are accepted that are just on the fringes of American society at the moment. That, all your great pandandrums in the media, Time magazine, New York Times, barely even think about, will be the common sense of their age. That applies to bad ideas as well as good ideas. A really bad idea started on the far left. I would even say it wasn't even left wing at all. After the collapse of communism, after the end of socialism. Remember, socialism defines what it means to be a left-winger for a good 100 years, from the 1880s through to the 1980s. Then that all goes. Then suddenly there are all these people, Noam Chomsky is a classic example to me, who have that same spirit but no longer have an ideology they can believe in. And so what do? They start just saying, look, anyone who is against the West can't be all bad. Anyone who's against the West, it has to be the West's fault. We are the root cause, to use a phrase that's been repeated to death. And then you suddenly find people who call themselves radicals or progressives or socialists or even feminists going along with movements which are anti-progressive, anti-socialist, anti-radical, anti-women, anti-gay, anti-Semitic, anti-everything, anti-liberal in the classic sense. Actually, movements that have stepped out of a liberal nightmare, if you look at their effects. But because they're anti-West, that's all that matters. It's because there's no longer a positive program for being left-wing. They just seize on anybody who is against America, against, to use their rather contentious language, we can have an argument about if we want later, against imperialism. And that just starts on the extremes. Like good ideas start on fringes, and it comes into the mainstream. Now, that's not wholly the fault of mainstream liberals. Never let George W. Bush off the hook, never let our leaders off the hook. Part of it is a perfectly possible reaction. The results are terrible, and not just in, poor countries. What about people in America? What about people in Britain? What about people in my country? Muslim women are now being told, well, you've got to go to Sharia courts. Well, these are free women in a free country. They're not second-class citizens. They don't have to have some theocratic legal system saying their evidence worth half of that of a man.
Right, but if you as a white guy say that, then people go bananas and you're pushing your views on them. Even though if you're the one that's abiding the laws of your country, which is what they're governed by.
Well, no, I'm afraid the laws of my country are slightly worse than that, in that, there's a danger, we're not quite there yet, we'll have parallel legal systems.
Yeah.
We'll have a system that, in civil cases, divorce cases, which, big deals, a Muslim woman will, the law seems quite content at the moment to say, we can settle this in the Sharia court. But this is kind of racist, is it not? If you were to say to a white woman, you have to go to a court where your evidence is worth half of that of a man,
right.
All liberal opinion across Britain, across America, across the world will go wild. This is sexism, this is misogyny, this is patriarchy. But it's okay when it happens to a brown-skinned woman. In the name of liberalism, we are creating the classic double standard of pre-liberal days that white people have more rights and white-skinned people have more rights than brown-skinned people.
Yeah.
So this is not just an issue for how people are treated in Saudi Arabia or Iran or any other country with a ultra-reactionary, I would say, and theocratic legal system. It's here now in our own societies. Yeah. And it does seem to me that liberals ought to decide what type of liberalism they believe in. Do they believe in liberalism means we've all got equal rights in universal values? Or does liberalism mean, well, there's one law for one group and one law for another group depending on their culture?
Does part of this seem to you that it's just the end game? This is the end result of identity politics. We're going through right now in America this really strong phase with identity politics.
Tell me about it. We're getting it here.
Right. So we're all divided on sexuality and race and just anything that you can divide people on, we're divided on it right now. And is part of this just that you saw the end game of all of this sort of before we did?
Well, I don't claim to be a prophet. I don't actually believe in prophets or gods or Bibles or Qurans or Talmuds or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
To me, there is a big vacuum opened up at the end of the 20th century with, first of all, as I said before, it may not mean so much to you in America, which never had big... In Europe and a lot of the world, the collapse of socialism, the collapse in the belief of the planned economy, of nationalized society, but also the collapse of a kind of, not collapse, but a marginalizing of liberal optimism. Liberal optimism just says that, look, there are universal human rights. Doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what your religion is. You can't say, oh, it's my culture to oppress women. You can't say that. Everyone would laugh at you.
Right.
And actually now they don't laugh at you. And that allows identity politics, which sounds fine. I've got a lot of, I read these reports of black students at Yale, and you think about the history of black oppression in America, and you can understand them. They're still just kids. They go a bit nuts. Mm-hmm. But identity politics has, and you think, well, okay, let them have their fuss. But identity politics has a hugely dark side, because you have no answer when the people who say, we are the masters of your identity, we are the community leaders, we are the mullahs, we are the rabbis, we are the priests, we control this group, this block, and we say, you're a part of our group, our block, our community, and we say that you don't have the same rights as a white Anglo-Saxon woman at Yale has. We say, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to you. It's against your culture. And that hasn't been thought through at all.
Right. So we split people into these little boxes, but then what we end up caring the least about is the people that are in the smaller boxes within those boxes.
Well, as Marjorie Nawaz says, you mentioned earlier, Marjorie has this wonderful phrase. What about minorities within minorities? What about liberals, the dissidents, the free thinkers, the blasphemers, the women, the gays, the people who say, what the hell? I am not this group. I'm not a Muslim or a Jew or whatever. I'm American.
Right, and that to me is the ultimate irony here, is that the spectrum of people that I've brought on the show and that now I've connected with on Twitter or wherever it is I'm not judging any of these people based on their color or their religion or their ethnicity. I'm basing it on their ideas, which is the most liberal idea.
Yeah, well, you're actually treating them as individuals, which is a very, very liberal idea.
Yeah.
God help you. It's the other problem. The other problem with identity politics is this: is when you stop treating people as individuals, you kind of identity politics is a slippery, treacherous conjunction. Is you can either have identity or you can have politics. Politics means you don't just look at people and say there's a block. In this instance, what we're talking about, the Muslims. What do you mean there's a group called the Muslims? Because when you say that, you normally end up handing over the right to speak to these Muslims, without asking their permission, to the most reactionary people in it, the people who want to enforce a communal identity and want to enforce it, first of all. I know there's all this paranoia going around after the Paris attacks and those awful events in California, but first and foremost, want to enforce it on their own kind, on their tribe, enforce their taboos on them, to keep them down. And the worst side of it is, I think it's been particularly bad in Britain and America, because we have this identity politics, multicultural problem that you've had is, well, what about the men and the women who say, hold on a second, this guy who says he's a community leader doesn't represent me, I've never voted for him, I don't agree with him. What about this man who says he's a priest, a rabbi, a mullah? I don't believe in all this crap, or I only partially believe in it, or I believe in bits of it. But you then start treating me as if this guy owns me, or this group owns me without my permission. That is the huge weakness. To date, it's where an awful lot, before we go on to great questions on, with Saudi Arabia, with Syria, what are we going to do about Islamic State? Mm-hmm. It's where everyday cruelty happens in our societies. It's where men and women who need a confident liberalism, a liberalism that believes in human rights, a liberalism that says, well, actually, we're not going to say that what matters first and foremost about you is your colour or your creed. They need them to help them, and they turn around to the very people who ought to be able to help them, and they're not there. In fact, they're on the other side.
In fact, they're on the other side. That's the key piece, because it's not just that. It's they're actually working to stop the reformers, and by calling everyone racist and all of this stuff. And then, what we have going on very much so in America right now is that Donald Trump just this week says we're going to close the borders to all Muslims. Well, now he throws red meat to the right. He probably does more good work for ISIS recruiting than he could possibly do. But unfortunately, he's been strengthened by a weak left. You talk a lot about that, actually, about how this far left group, now what we're calling the Regressives, ultimately end up strengthening a lot of ideas that they should be against. And that's what we're seeing with Trump.
And vice versa. And vice versa. I was at a meeting today at The Guardian, which is where I work, and I love the place. And but it is Britain's leading left-wing newspaper. And people in the audience, their first questions were about Donald Trump. Their first questions were, and you could see, perhaps I'm reading too much into the audience members and such, but Donald Trump was stopping her taking on reactionaries on the Islamist side. So, you've got, it's very hard to get the notion that there are two extreme rights. There is the white extreme right, and I wouldn't, until a few weeks ago, said Donald Trump was on it. I mean, he seems to be heading that way now.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is the religious extreme right, the Islamist extreme right. And you need to fight them both for the same reasons and with the same arguments. It is very difficult. People seem to find that very, very difficult to do. It strikes me as the only principal position, but I imagine if I walked onto any campus in America and said that, there'd be no platform.
Not only would there be no platform, but they'd be trigger warned. They'd go into a safe space, all the other stuff we're talking about. And then, I
never realized they were so frightening, Dave.
Right. I've had several guests that I didn't think were that frightening that for some reason have to have trigger warnings issued before they speak on campuses. So, look, a lot of this is happening in Europe first, which is another reason that I'm talking about it so much, because I don't want it to take hold here the way it has taken hold in Europe. What do you make of the far-right parties that are now winning across Europe, right? Marie Le Pen just won in France. I now see that in Denmark and in Sweden, far-right parties are leading in polls for the first time ever. Belgium. So this thing seems to be metastasizing right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, I mean, there are the reasons for that, Dave. I mean, the European Union, it's not like the USA. It's tried to be like the USA without the common culture, the common institutions. And as I'm fond of pointing out to people in the EU who want to be like the USA, I say, well, the USA had one hell of a civil war before it became the USA for today. I mean, right. Do you want that? There are other reasons. There's two things I want to say. One you might quite like, the other maybe less so. The thing you might quite like is we seem to agree on this, is this. You can't run around shrieking your head off, having trigger warnings and safe spaces when, I don't know, a celebrity or a politician makes a slightly off-colour remark about homosexuals, or women, or slightly sexist remark about women, and have it leading the news, and columnists on the New York Times needing a cold shower to calm themselves down afterwards, and then ignore religious homophobia, including deadly religious homophobia among ethnic minorities. You just can't do that without paying a price. Because don't think people aren't watching you. Don't think the rest of society. A lot of political writing on the left as well as the right, it's like it's a private club. They just talk to themselves. The right watches Fox News, the left watches Jon Stewart. They just talk to themselves. It's like a private club and everyone understands the rules. And they forget that outsiders are watching them. They forget outsiders are saying, you bloody hypocrites. Yeah. You will have one rule for white people and another rule for the rest, and you will not stand up to go back against universal principles. So there is that. That does matter. Political correctness in Britain has become this kind of swear word. And it doesn't mean stuff that you would understand by political correctness. It means deep, deep, deep hypocrisy, misgovernment, ill government. So that's all true. You can blame the left for that. On the other hand, people who vote, how badly am I allowed to swear on your program?
Swear away. Bring it. Let's go.
People who vote for Donald Trump, there has to come a point where you just say, well, fuck off. Right. You're voting for Donald Trump. You're voting for Marine Le Pen. We will try. We will not. We will not give up on you. We're your fellow citizens. But there comes a point where you just say, well, to hell with you. You are our opponents. The difficulty is, and it has come, I don't know if your American viewers know about this, we've now got the worst type of leftist leading our opposition party, the Labour Party, who's like a caricature. If I had to write an example of what the worst of the left is in Britain.
Jeremy Corbyn.
A guy called Jeremy Corbyn, yeah. The only good thing about him becoming Labour leader is books I wrote are now selling, like hotcakes. But I mean, my selfish point of view aside, is you've got a terrible right in America with Trump, in France with the National Front, in Sweden and Denmark and all these places, Poland, Hungary, it's popping up all over Europe. Not just because of immigration radicalism, partly because the European single currency has been one of the great economic mistakes. And And then you've got a left in a space where a principled left should be. Certainly in Britain, you've got this kind of joke figure that would go along with any organisation, however fascistic, as long as it's anti-West. So, lots of people are feeling a bit politically homeless over here.
Yeah. Does it all feel like a perfect storm to you, what's going on right now? And again, this is the stuff that's after your book when we talk about the refugees and some of the economic problems in Europe and this, dealing with radical Islam. It was going on while you were writing the book, obviously, but it seems to me we have like 5 things right now that are all working at the same time.
Yeah.
Then you toss in social media, you toss in, that we see videos from everywhere. Now we can see beheadings, we can see bombings.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see religious violence and you can see state violence all the time. That we really have all of this happening at once, and it's leading to a very strange place.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, Dave, we can say with certainty that whoever it was, Francis Fukuyama, who said after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this is the end of history, history's over. Boy, was that a stupid thing to say. And you can't. Let me go back to the point I made to you right at the start, that the weirdness and the hypocrisy and the awful betrayal of people you get on people who call themselves the left comes when they don't have a socialist alternative. They don't have, the Soviet Union falls, socialism collapses across the world, no one believes in it anymore. And that was fine for a while, if I may generalize in a very glib way. That was fine for a while because capitalism, or call it what you will, seems to be a great success story. Mm-hmm. Seemed to work. That's why Francis Fukuyama was not such an idiot when he said history was over. Well, ever since the crash of 2008, that system of liberal capitalism has failed. And that's why you've got this feeling of, perfect storm, too many things coming at us at once. It is not entirely... there's a wonderful phrase by the Italian socialist Antonio Gramsci: "The old is dead, the new cannot be born. In that interregnum, many strange forms will appear." Yeah. It seems like that. We don't know what comes next. We're not sure of what we've got. We're not sure it works anymore. Not sure it works for ordinary middle-class Americans watching your program. How their pay isn't going up. The super rich are getting richer. The American dream doesn't seem to quite work anymore, even with Obama. It's not quite clear where the alternatives for that are. And so you get these strange, abhorrent, freakish forms, which, when I wrote that book, as I said, people just kept saying to me, "Oh, Nick, those are just on the fringes." Well, now it's on the mainstream.
Going to that point, what about some of the tactics these guys use? And I want to talk a little bit about Chomsky, but first we can talk just sort of in the more broader sense. When I've seen the way these guys debate, or the way they treat topics, and again, everyone's racist and all that, they don't seem to mind if they get caught in lies. They love just throwing out the bomb, and then it spreads like wildfire on social media. And there's that famous saying, it takes 1 second to lie, but it takes a lifetime to get it back, or whatever it is. And it seems that a series of these guys, they love this. And I don't know, look, again, I'm not on the right, so I don't like the right. I've never been part of the right, so I police them differently, but I don't want to see this from my guys. So what do you think about just the tactics that they're using themselves?
Before we go any further, Dave, one question to you.
Yeah.
Plain speaking, open heart.
Sure.
Does the right behave any better than that?
No, they do. Look, they don't. Look, I'm dealing in America with Trump right this second with over-the-top bombacity. So, and again, this is why, look, I'm a guilty liberal in that sense, that sometimes I feel bad. I spend so much time on the guys on my side, and that I'm afraid, people ask me all the time, am I afraid that ultimately this will strengthen the right? But to me, it's like, if we don't stand up now, well, then the game is over. We just hand it to the right, which is what's happening, I think, with Trump.
Yeah. There is a long tradition of lying on the left. If you go back to Stalin, he got gullible people to believe in show trials where people confessed to impossible crimes that weren't committed. So there is that. I'm less interested. I'm less concerned about left and right than this. Here's something that happens with new media. You now have states Fox News, I think, is a pretty bad thing. I think its main audience seems to be liberal journalists looking for easy material to write. But it's a bad day. You've got nothing to do. You've got no ideas. I know. I'll turn on Fox News. It's really good. You've now got states, Russia and Iran most notably, producing propaganda channels that are dedicated to pushing half-truths, conspiracy theories, lies, a jet shot down over the Ukraine. There's television channels in English who are pumping stuff out. Mm-hmm. So, whereas once, if you're on the left in America, you just have to go on and on about something Nixon was putting out or something in the Wall Street Journal, even something on Fox News. And if you're on the right in America, you would complain about New York Times, deliberately covering something up. Now you've suddenly got whole states with their secret services, their foreign offices, their propaganda arms behind them, pumping material into the West, which is incidentally taken up by both the far left and the far right. It's very difficult, certainly in Britain, as I say, things have gone much, much further than they have in America. It's very, very difficult to tell apart the people who support Putin, for instance, and Russia today. You've got Marine Le Pen doing it, who is the leader of the French far-right party. You've got George Galloway, who's this strange combination of leftist and Islamist in Britain. And so you've got a kind of merger of the extremes against liberal democracy. And they're both equally keen on Putin. They're both equally sympathetic to Iran. What matters to them most is building a conspiratorial narrative.
So in a lot of ways, we really could blame sort of mainstream media for this craziness, right? Because it seems to me that for a long time, mainstream media, which had no competition before the digital age, they did such a poor job that then they handed everything over to the digital side. And I think for a while, the online media, for the first few years of it, I think they did do a really nice job in breaking stories and getting out information. Yeah, that you wouldn't get otherwise. And now it seems like the gloves are off, and now it's anything's true. Nobody knows who to trust.
There's a lot of truth in that, and I don't accept some kind of binary division between new media and old media. There's good journalism and there's bad journalism.
I like that.
But here's the problem, Dave. If you are me at The Guardian or The Observer or on the LA Times, you're talking to a reporter on the LA Times, and you start saying, well, you've done a terrible job. You're allowing all these cranks, these fruitcakes, these flim-flam merchants from all over the world to walk all over you. The man or woman at the LA Times will say, look, Dave, our business model's collapsed. We're trying to staff bureaus in Peking, in Beijing, in Tehran. Give me a break. We can barely get a reporter up the road to San Francisco.
Right.
The business model for, if you like, serious journalism, particularly serious foreign journalism, is getting harder and harder to sustain. Although I'm sure the LA Times and newspapers and across America are, to my knowledge, from having met the men who work on them, are really dedicated to trying to keep it going. But in the end, the lack of money talks. Money talks, but the silence that comes from the lack of money is a silence which just closes debate. So the gap is just being filled. What worries me is not people talking rubbish or people talking drivel. They always have. Is where are you going to get the reliable reports on what is happening in Peking? Beijing? Where are you going to get the reliable reports on how Putin is manipulating European opinion? That's getting harder and harder to do.
Okay, well, as someone that I consider an expert in this space, how do you decide who to trust? I really don't know anymore. I follow a lot of different organizations, right, left, middle, as reputable and some off the deep end, and I try to pilfer out some knowledge and some truth. And I try not to only follow things that reinforce my beliefs, which is another huge problem that social media has given us. But how do you decide who to trust?
Well, David, you're probably going to accuse me of being horribly old-fashioned and stuff, but there are still organisations I trust. I still trust an article on New York Times newspapers, unless it's because I know there's a very, very strong editing process there, and its opinion pages are separate, and what have you. Now, that may change as the business model for journalism goes down, but I still do.
Well, look, they had an op-ed on the front page for the first time in 95 years, just last week.
How disgraceful. Yeah, let's go around. We ought to go around and have a demo outside. We don't want your bloody opinions, we ought to say. Give us some news.
I'd read a paper that had that on the front. All right, so let's back up for a second. Let's talk for a few minutes about Noam Chomsky, because you talk about him a bit in the book. It's not a tremendous amount, but I have a friend who's on what I consider in this regressive group, and a lot of times we'll be debating back and forth about this stuff, and I'll be giving him as much historical knowledge as I have and as much factual knowledge as I have. And then he'll sort of always end everything by saying, well, I don't really know about that, but I read some Chomsky and I'm just kind of giving it back to you. And I think you sort of hit on that also in the book, that there's just this belief in this guy that maybe isn't fully warranted, or he's been very good at waving off the things that don't quite agree with his worldview.
Yeah, it's interesting for two reasons. I mean, one, he's an old guy, I don't want to come on, just shout him down, but I mean, he's adopted some pretty disgraceful positions, denying the massacres of Bosnian Muslims and going along with people who, it's the 1990s, and going along with that, and never admitting he's wrong, and building this Chomsky's writing, it's very poor writing in some standards of English, but it builds this very dense web, and like your friend, once you're in, you're like a fly caught in the web. It's very hard to get out. Yeah. So that's kind of fisking. Do you say fisking in America? You fisk.
I know what fisking is, but I don't know that people really say.
Yeah, you just go through it and you say, look, this man, this is all from a point of view. It's sort of made up, and actually, when you think about what he's doing, it's quite disgraceful. But here's why I thought Chomsky was worth devoting a chapter to, is this. What kind of, you are a young radical on the American campus, and you get your Chomsky, you read all his books, and you think, well, what kind of society are you aiming for? There is no social vision. There's nothing that the progressives and socialists who run through American history from the 1880s would recognize. They'll just say, well, this is all just saying America's shit, if you forgive me. America's shit. America would probably have never have happened. The Pilgrim Fathers would probably have turned around at Plymouth Rock and gone back to England. The whole thing is a disaster. Everything it does is wrong. Everything is a lie. And you think, well, that's a ridiculous world vision. But funnily enough, here's the thing. It's really easy to buy into.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to commit to anything. The regressive left, so I really like that phrase. Well, let's stick with the regressive left. Yeah. The Chomskyan left, the post-socialist left. On the one hand, it has very, very little to say positive. On the other hand, that's kind of easy for everyone to sign up to. You just have to think that Washington's a pile of shit. Well, Washington, D.C. is a pile of shit. Well, that's easy enough. Yeah. That the State Department doesn't know what it's doing. Yeah, fine. The CIA is wicked. And so instead of having a left wing you had to make really positive commitments for, 40 years ago, I could have come on your program and said, I'm a socialist, right? I'm a socialist. And your audience might have said, oh, right, Nick Cohen, he's a socialist. That sounds good. We'll go along with him. He says, and I say, I want massively high taxes, or I want to nationalize this and that. And people who would have been agreeing would say, well, back off and say, hell, I don't want anything to do with this. This guy's threatening my living standards. Now, you just have to say that everything you read is a lie, your government's evil. And so suddenly that's actually, because you're making so few positive policy commitments as Chomsky does, it's suddenly very easy to go along with him. I go into the homes of people here in London, which is a very expensive city. I go into homes of the richest people I know, and their books by Noam Chomsky on their shelves. And that's because, funnily enough, for all the supposed radicalism, that kind of left wing without a positive program, with just the critique, is no threat to them. It's no threat to the wealthy. It's no threat to the powerful. It's no threat to the bankers on Wall Street. It's something lots of people, when they're quite justifiably often pissed off with their government, or because they've got a conspiracy theory mind, or because they want to look trendy, everyone can sign up to that. Mm-hmm. A genuine left-wing program is hard. A genuine left-wing program makes friends and enemies. But this kind of pseudo-left, this regressive left, it's terribly easy to believe in. Too easy, I think, for any successful political movement.
You know, it's interesting because I was really embedded in it for a couple of years, and I guess I hadn't pieced this all together, what you're talking about right now. But part of my frustration was that we never talked about solutions. We always could talk about problems, right? It was always, you know, the American industrial complex and bombing and race and whatever, but there were never solutions. So that does get to what you're saying, that it's sort of...
You see, because as soon as you offer a solution, you're going to piss some people off.
Yeah.
Because a solution means, and you have to make a commitment. And as soon as you make a commitment, then people can say, well, look, Dave Rubin believes in this. Well, this is wrong. You know, it's very easy to just say it's all a conspiracy. It's all shit.
Yeah.
That way you don't expose yourself. You're not making a positive program and sticking your neck out there and waiting to see who shoots you down.
So speaking of conspiracy theories, one of the through lines throughout the book, and then you do devote a chapter to it in completion, is that in all of these movements, somehow blaming the Jews, it always comes around to blaming the Jews. Now the language has changed, now it's blaming Zionists or blaming Israel.
Get it right, Dave. No one says Jews anymore, it's Zionists.
Right, now it's not politically correct to say Jews, so you just say Zionists or you say Israel or whatever it is. But you really did lay out an interesting piece in almost every example throughout time that they were always, on both sides. The capitalists would say the Jews are socialists, the socialists would say Jews are capitalists, and every other which way. What do you think that is about? I think you probably just explained it with this conspiratorial thing and the other, right?
Yeah, well, look, here's the problem. If you genuinely think that your State Department, your CIA, your president, for all their many, many faults, and I'm sure they're legion, but if you genuinely think that they, for instance, secretly blew up the Twin Towers, and then let Al-Qaeda take the blame, that they invented a way to go into war in Iraq, that Obama it applies to the right as much as the left, you know, Obama isn't a real American, he's a secret Muslim from Kenya, you know. If you genuinely believe in all that, you have to believe in an extraordinary view of the world where a handful of people can fool the entire population, the sheeple. Well, once you start thinking like that, who are those handful of people historically? You know, you start down that road, you end up in the Jews. What I found shocking, being called Cohen, is this.
I was going to mention this.
Yeah, and I think some of your liberal American Jews will find it shocking because I say we're 5 years ahead of you. When it comes and hits them, is this. I never expected to find anti-Semitism on the left. Perhaps I was being naive, but it is quite extraordinary the extent of it, and it's quite extraordinary how it's tolerated, how it isn't called out. Now,
so do you think some of that, when I hear people say that, and first, real quick, we should mention. So you just mentioned your last name, Cohen. You're actually not Jewish. So you were. No, my family abandoned their religion for the religion of Marxism. So you know, I'm from an ex-communist family of about 1900. You know, Jews wouldn't have me as Jewish, but you know, you call Cohen Dave, it's not, unnatural people to think you're Jews, and also you're Jewish. But here's the problem: if you look at anti-Semitism has virtually nothing to do with Jews. Anti-Semitism became in the late 19th century, the early 20th century, and the Tsars and the Nazis, it was a way of fighting progress. It was a way of saying, look, you, democracy, human rights, women's rights, you know, all these, you shouldn't believe in them. They're all fakes. They're all frauds. Behind them is a puppet master pulling the strings, and that puppet master is the Jews. So you would have thought that a left that believes in democracy and human rights would be, for its own sake as much as anything else, on alert the whole time for the dangers of anti-Semitism. But actually, you know, going back to Chomsky, they believe democracy, they believe human rights is all a fraud, they believe it's all a lie. So that's one reason why they end up there. Well, not Chomsky himself, but that's why people end up there. And they don't understand what goes with it. They don't look at organizations like Hezbollah or Iran and say, hold on a second, okay, they're anti-Semitic,
but that's just because of Israel. And then they don't say, but hold on a second, but look at the way they treat women, look at the way they treat homosexuals, look at the way that they dismiss human rights, the way they dismiss democracy. They don't understand that anti-Semitism absolutely goes along with that. And once you accept anti-Semitism, you have to not just throw out anti-racism, but you have to throw out all your progressive principles, because historically, anti-Semitism has always been used by ultra-reactionary movements, who, again, the left should be against.
Right. So this, I always say when it comes to this, and I was just in Israel last week, and at the top of the show when I did my piece, I was saying how I saw coexistence there. I was in Jerusalem. You know, I ate falafel in the Arab Quarter. I saw Israeli policemen helping Muslim women move a box. I saw ultra-Orthodox Jews. I mean, that doesn't happen anywhere in the Middle East except for Israel. And of course, not to say everything's perfect there, and there's all sorts of political problems and religious problems and all that. But the only place that has any progressive values in the Middle East is Israel, and they hate it.
Well, yeah. But I mean, look, you shouldn't engage in whataboutery. And there's a lot of whataboutery on the left. There's quite a lot of whataboutery on the right. You know, you say, someone says, well, there's problems on the West Bank, there's problems in Gaza, and you say, what about Syria? Which actually is quite a good whatabout.
Right.
But, you know, which is a hell of a whatabout when you think about it. But, you know, you shouldn't say that doesn't mean the Palestinians shouldn't have their own state. That doesn't mean there are horrendous problems with the Israeli right. And you shouldn't sort of romanticize Israel.
Yeah.
At all. But here's the thing: is the problem is one of the great reasons for, I would say, the liberal difficulty in understanding radical Islam is there's a very good liberal impulse that assumes the world is rational. You know, that assumes that if there is this terrible terroristic movement that would blow up the Twin Towers, that would, we knew if they had chemical weapons or nuclear weapons they could use against civilians, they would. There must be a root cause for it. You know, there must be some rational explanation that we can satisfy, that we can appropriate these evil gods. They can't just be that angry against stuff. It's not partly our fault.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that actually right after the Paris attacks, because I saw immediately my friends on the left saying American foreign policy, even though 2 days later, you know, Boko Haram killed 140 people, and obviously that has nothing to do with American foreign policy. But there's this rationalization, even though at the same time, the people who did the Paris attacks were saying this is for religious purposes.
Yeah, but your friends on the left just ought to go and read the history of Nazism, the history of communism. Yes, there are rational reasons that you can blame. You know, you could say if bombs go off at the Charlie Hebdo office in Paris, your friends on the left say, oh, it's their fault. They shouldn't have put cartoons of Mohammed. Yeah. People are slaughtered at a Jewish supermarket in Paris, the hyper-cash supermarket. Oh, it's their fault because of Israel. Because Israel's occupying the West Bank. So, okay, you kill the satirists, that's okay. You kill the Jews, that's okay. People are slaughtered at a football stadium, the Stade de Paris. People are slaughtered at a rock concert. People are slaughtered at a Cambodian restaurant on the Parisian Boulevard. Well, that's kind of their fault because, well, we're not quite sure. American foreign policy, maybe French foreign policy. Now, these are sort of rational explanations, and there's a bit of truth in them. The problem is, every step you take seems rational and liberal, but every step you take takes you away from rationality and liberalism. And you end up like the very murderers you're trying to explain, because you accept their whole ideology, but you don't understand it. You don't understand that they are not people who are sitting there saying, well, we've got a rational grievance, like someone about to file a claim at a county court. Right. They have a utopian totalitarian ideology. You know, and having lived through the 20th century, or a last bit of the 20th century, when utopian ideologies kill millions of people, we still don't understand that someone like Islamic State says, we think we can create heaven on earth. We think we can create a caliphate that will govern the whole earth, and this will be paradise. And to do that, what's it matter if 1 million, 2 million, 10 million people are killed? They don't They think they're explained. They don't understand anything.
Yeah, so that actually is the ultimate irony, because on one hand, you're saying, well, look, if we took everything, if we did whatever it is they want us to do, right? We took all our troops out of here, we stopped bombing here, whatever, then suddenly they'd like us more. But that's not what they're saying. So it really is, it's the most ironic piece of this.
What they want you to do, Dave, is become them.
Yeah.
That's the only way they'll leave you alone. And so here you go. I mean, your friends in California, I'm probably, I've never met them. I'm sure they're lovely people.
Some of them.
Some, okay. But, I'm sure they think of themselves as anti-sexist, anti-racist, anti-homophobic. I'm sure they're fine on trans issues. I bet some of them don't even eat meat. But they will then, through thinking they're being logical, end up defending the most sexist, racist, homophobic, illiberal movements on earth. And do so in a, this is not a point made by me, it's a point made by a very brilliant French philosopher, do so in a very narcissistic way. It's all our fault. We are the centre of the world. If something terrible happens, it must be down to us. Not that people in the rest of the world have their own agency, not people in the rest of the world can't be just as wicked or stupid as we can. They are infants, they are children who are goaded by us. It's all down to what we do. We are still, the narcissist, the ego, the people at the centre of it all.
Yeah, I think when I had Douglas Murray on, he illustrated that point. He said, look, the world could go to hell in a handbasket and it'll have nothing to do with America. You just can't, it's just childlike thinking. All right, so...
incidentally treats Muslim populations as children. It infantilizes them.
Yeah.
It says, look, we're adults. We're these white Western Europeans. We can handle satire. We can handle our leaders and gods and bishops and clerics. My God, you can't do it with those Muslims. They're like toddlers. Like violent little delinquent children. You show them a cartoon they don't like, they start blowing the place up.
Yeah. Ironically, that's what George W. Bush called the soft bigotry of low expectations, which I keep crediting Bill Maher with, but apparently it was George W. Bush, which is mind-blowing in itself.
That is a very, very good phrase, and it's true. And actually, it's worse than soft bigotry. It does keep people down because, look, Muslim men and women watching your program in California doesn't really help them when they're going out looking for a job. Or looking to get on in life, or wanting to be treated with respect, or wanting to be treated as equals. If liberals are saying, oh, well, they're very, very funny people, these people, you have to be very careful what you say in front of them, one cartoon, and they'll blow the top. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help them be full citizens to be treated in a totally different way from everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I have one more for you. I could do this for 5 hours with you, so you'll have to come on again.
It's midnight here in England,
But I want you to have your tea and go to bed. So I'll end with this. Look, you wrote What's Left in 2007. That was 8 years ago. So let's fast forward 8 years from now. It's 2023. Give me a little hope if you can find some hope. But if you can't, then give me where you think we're going to be at 8 years from now.
Well, that was actually, funny enough, that book was quite hopeful, and I still consider myself a left-winger, and I wrote that, less so now. If there's hope, it will rely on liberals, intellectuals, feminists within the Muslim world, within Muslim communities in the West, taking on their extremists. And I just hope that the shame which has descended on Western liberalism, it's one of the most shameful periods of history, that when those liberals and those Democrats and those feminists take on their extremists, fucking Western liberals want to do what they're meant to do and support them instead of supporting their enemies, instead of making excuses for their enemies. For once, live their principles. Or otherwise, they'll just give up, shut up, say, actually, we're not really liberals at all. We just want to go to the beach, have a beer, don't care, we don't really care about other people. But either give up or show some solidarity.
Yeah, well, I love that, and I do like a well-placed fuck, so that was really nice too. You guys can pick up either of Nick's books wherever books are sold, or you can download an ebook, however you do that. I did it, so you can probably figure it out. Nick, it was an absolute pleasure. I hope we can do this in LA in person next time. And I thank you guys for watching. and we'll do it again next week.